The U.S. has decided that tariffs would be there in the long run.
Industry Minister Melanie Joly says the quiet part out loud by admitting on CTV that free trade with the United States is never coming back and they have absolutely no idea what they're going to do about it. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Canada's Industry Minister Melanie Joly was with Vashi Kapelas making a complete mess of her jacket and trying to convince Canadians that on the one hand, she's there all about the industry, but on the other hand, the idea that the climate impact on the industry in Canada is somehow not her concern. I don't think that we as Canadians can separate those jackets. And she wanted to move them over to the finance minister, you'll hear, and she tries to move them over to the environment minister. But industry is hampered by both of these jackets, especially the environment jacket. And what are we doing about making sure that our industry can operate without having all of the restrictions of the environmentalists, while the rest of the world, especially the United States, functions in an economic model that does not include those kinds of restrictions? You'll hear that she has absolutely no idea what she's doing. She jumps around back and forth, tries to deflect, and that's primarily because she is utterly underqualified for this task. But before we get into it, I would encourage all of you that are not subscribed to the channel to subscribe to the channel. If you like the content, if you like the video, hit the thumbs up, hit the notification bell, then you'll be notified whenever I put up content. Of course, that's something that Canadian content creators have to worry about because of Bill C-18 and Bill C-11 that permits the federal government to interfere with that algorithm that will allow for our content to be shown to a broader and wider audience. So subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell assists me in reaching a broader audience. So if you like the content, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell. All right, let's get into this.
Trump's tariffs on the auto sector, the same ones that are in place today, were in place then. What changed and why did it take your government so long?
And so we needed to be pragmatic. We need to make sure that we are there for our auto sector while continuing to have very ambitious climate change goals. So making sure that we reduce emission. And that's why we're launching a 60-day period consultation. That's a very short period of consultation because we want to be able also to either do more EVs in Canada or also bring more affordable EVs from different countries, including Europe, South Korea, and Japan.
Out of the gate, just let me say, Minister Joly, that 60 days is too long. All the Liberals seem to want to do is talk, 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 talk. It's enough talk. We need action. Canadians need action. And I think the best way for you to solve the problem is to resign and get out of the way because all you know how to do is talk. You don't know how to do anything else. Your track record indicates that you've never accomplished anything other than talking. Then she says, oh, well, we want to see if we can bring them in from a cheaper location like Korea or Europe. Now, if I understand you correctly, Melanie Joly, Industry Minister, your idea is that despite the fact that we have all of the raw material required in Canada to make both the batteries and the cars, it's cheaper for us to sail these cars from across the world, whether you be in Asia, whether you be in Europe. They are far away. And we're going to put them on in limited quantities onto boats and sail them to Canada and be able to sell them at less money than what we can sell them as being manufactured in Canada. And why? Because of the restrictions that the Liberal government puts on industry, because of the taxation, because of the industrial carbon tax, and because of all of the other regulations and restrictions. It's less expensive to make it on the other side of the earth, sail it here on a boat, and we could still buy it for less money than the one that's made in Canada. And you believe in your mind that we should talk about that for 60 days.
At the end of May 26th, I believe, 5 of the biggest automakers in Canada urged the Prime Minister to scrap the mandate because at that very moment, they conveyed to him it was, quote, inflicting serious damage across the country. Did you just not want to give the Conservatives a win to the disadvantage of the auto sector you oversee?
Oh, I think you're overthinking it, Vashi, because when you look at it, at the end of Q4 of last year, 19% of new cars being sold in Canada were EVs, and then eventually it dropped to 8%, including because Canada decided to let go its subsidies, and now we're looking at bringing them back. So based on that, we just needed to act, and the budget is coming, and we'll be able to make decisions in the context of the budget, and that's up to the Minister of Finance to take his decisions. But meanwhile, the sector is really affected. And so we're not dealing with ideology, we're dealing with a real reality.
Did you follow that string of messed up logic? Because the Canadian government was no longer taking my tax dollars and buying electric cars for other people, the people stopped buying electric cars by an enormous amount, by more than 50%. The purchases of electric cars decreased. On top of that, we're going to be talking about getting a budget soon. So I don't know how much money is coming into the industry for that, but I'm pretty sure that the finance minister will answer those questions. All the while trying to convince you that it's not about ideology. So this industry minister has no idea what kind of impact the budget is going to have on industry in Canada, while she tries to convince you that it's not about ideology, even though the decision is being based around the carbon that is, depending on who you talk to, a threat or not a threat, an ideology of eco-mentalism. I just wish she could keep her story straight. It doesn't instill a lot of confidence that this federal minister who's in charge of the industry in Canada cannot keep her story straight from one sentence to the next.
What I said to you initially was what the auto sector had conveyed at the end of May, which is that they were in a crisis at this moment, that the mandate that you had in place was inflicting serious damage. Like, that's a direct quote from a letter that they sent and that they conveyed to the Prime Minister. Why do you need another 60 days to decide whether to get rid of this thing when you know how it's impacting the sector?
And the Minister of the Environment is working on this. Meanwhile, I'm here to talk to you about also what we're doing for the sectors that are much more affected.
Vashi indicates that a letter was written to the federal government from the auto sector telling the federal government that they cannot function inside of the rules that the federal government has in place, especially the EV mandate that was coming down the pipe. And to respond to that, Melanie Joly, the industry minister, says, well, I'm going to move the ball over to the environment minister. And I'm here to talk about the affected sectors. But those sectors are affected by the laws that are rooted in the eco-mentalism, in the carbon craziness that the federal government, the Liberal federal government, is imposing on industry in Canada. So how do you try to separate those two kinds of things? And perhaps we should fold those two jackets in, because they are linked no matter what you try to convince the Canadian people of. Industry is having a hard time, not because of the tariffs or the trade dispute with the United States of America. Industry is having a hard time because there are 4 or 5 environmental-based laws in the way, interfering with their development and their ability to become capitalists and reach the market and thus save the economy of Canada. You would hope that the industry minister would understand that, though up to now I see no evidence to support that contention.
The U.S. has decided that tariffs would be there in the long run. But I must say there is a real rupture with the free trade world that we're living in. Auto, but also we're looking at other sectors, including lumber, steel, aluminum, and other sectors that could be facing threats from the American government. And so that's why we're acting.
2 things there I take issue with. First of all, the Liberal government is saying that Canada has the best trade deal in the world, the best of a worst deal. So why is the American still being called a threat? I think that she's stuck in a little bit of her rhetoric. Also, all of the industries that she listed are all hampered by the emissions cap and by other regulations that have been imposed by the federal government. And I believe that if the federal government simply removed those, rather than drafting another piece of legislation that allows them to bypass that called C5, we would have the investment from industry and from business that we require to get our economy back up and running. What we need is the Liberal government to get out of the way.
Can you be unequivocal with Canadians watching right now? Will you maintain the targets that the previous Trudeau government had, the emissions reductions targets that are in place?
And I'm convinced the Minister of the Environment, which I'm convinced will make her available to answer your question, could be there to go much more into the specific details.
I don't have a clear answer on whether or not outside of 2050 you'll maintain the targets. I will ask the question of the Environment Minister.
Again, MP Joly, you are the industry minister. Are you not hearing from industry that the environmental laws that are in place, that are imposed, that are being shoved down the throats of industry, that are handcuffing industry, that are making it so that industry feels a level of unpredictability that they cannot invest in Canada, they cannot invest in their industry? Is that something that is going over your head? Are you ignoring it, or are you just choosing not to inform Canadians that that's what you're hearing from the auto sector, the steel sector, the lumber sector, as just to name a few? Because it's the environmental laws that are in the way, and you trying to separate yourself from that by saying, well, that's not my jacket, is an absurd position to take. You are the industry minister. You must understand that industry is being hampered by the environmental lunacy of the federal government. And as a result, they need those laws to get out of the way so that they can get down to business in Canada and start to revitalize our economy and save our country. Of course, the federal government, the Liberal government, can't release those controls because they are too wrapped up in their centralist government and feeling that they know better than everybody else about everything.
There is unpredictability, which drives a lot of pause by industry leaders, by business owners, in order for them to be able to predict what they can do within their own business for the next 3 to 5 years, sometimes 10 years. And then they can invest, they can hire, they can grow their footprint.
I know that you're not the Minister of Environment, but you spent 10 years, essentially around a cabinet table telling Canadians that the environment and the economy go hand in hand, and now you're telling them something very different.
That is a very good point, Vashi. The Liberal government is saying one thing, then they're saying the opposite thing, depending on who they're talking to. They have a flip-flopping platform, it seems. They don't believe in anything. And they want you to believe that somehow the Canadian people, that somehow they're going to be able to keep the environmental laws in place and somehow that's going to save industry. But we're going to tell industry that they have to follow the environmental. Like, you just can't keep track of it all. And that's the uncertainty that Canadians need to see for reality. It's not coming from the Americans. It's coming from Canada, because the American market was the only market that the Canadian government allowed, the federal government has really control over. And that was the one that they were allowing product to flow from Canada into the United States. Now, of course, because of the environmental laws, we can't have product flowing across the country. And the only thing that's going to be brought into the country is made in America. And that means that all of the industry and all of the jobs and all of the business are flowing down to the United States and are prepared to pay whatever tariffs the Canadian government feels they can impose, rather than have to pay for all of the environmental foolishness that the federal government restricts Canadian industry with. And this is the kind of insecurity that businesses look at and say, do not invest in Canada.
I'm saying that the same thing because I really think that the environment and the economy go hand in hand, and clean energy solutions. And that's why also in the major projects that you will see, there's a lot of emphasis on building the right infrastructure across the country. But my job in the government is really working on supporting jobs, helping the companies to be able to take risks again. The steel workers, the auto workers, the people in the sector of the aluminum sector, the lumber, the people working in the lumber sectors that are watching us right now are anxious, and their livelihoods are at stake.
Well, there you have it, guys. She, on the one hand, believes that industry and the environment are tied together. However, the laws that are a part of the environment are not her responsibility. So what she's doing is going to have the major projects that are coming down the pipe be all about being green, despite the fact that most of the industry that she keeps listing off are by their very nature called not green by her very own government. And she wants you to believe that she's going to be assisting those industries, all the while telling you that the environmental industries that the Liberal government is going to be shoving down the pipe are going to be the better choices, the good choices, she puts it. Because, of course, the Liberal government being far left, they feel that they're the only ones who have the answers to everything. Nobody else that doesn't agree with their ideology 100% could ever have something to contribute to the conversation, which is, of course, how we end up in this position. People don't realize that we need to have freedom of speech, and we need to have input from all aspects and to find a middle ground, to find a solution to the problem. Because being extremists, like the Liberal government is showing you, has been for the last decade, has only introduced problems, not solutions. So obviously there's a component that's missing. And I believe the best way to get Canadians and Canada out of this mess is to just get the Liberal government out of the way. They're too zealot, they're too extreme. And they flip-flop, and they can't even keep track of their own sentences, whether it be Mark Carney or whether it be Minister Joly or whether it be Champagne. They just simply cannot keep track of what they're saying from one sentence to the next. And I believe that's just because they don't really care about solving the problem. They do best when the problems stay around. They do best when the industries are messed up. They do best when the country's messed up. Because like all far-left governments, they're only worried about the very short term. So they'll tell you whatever you want to hear, and that keeps them employed. That keeps them functioning. But now we can see after this amount of time that lives that were doing fine in 2015 are now straining and struggling under the economic and the environmental impacts of the Liberal government. And solutions are what Canadians are looking for. Not more talk, not more mismanagement, not more doublespeak, just simply straightforward solutions. Let's solve the problem. Let's get back to living a life that's calm and tranquil and normal rather than be stressed and hanging on edge constantly all the time. I'm not sure that the Liberal government is ever going to be able to provide that for us, because they campaigned and joined the government on being zealots, on being extremists. And even the industry minister here, who says that she's only worried about the industries that she lists off. All of those industries that she lists off are oftentimes called major contributors to this very same carbon that she's talking about. And she then says the environment laws and the budget are going to help or not or hinder those very same industries. But because they're not her jackets, she doesn't think that calculating those into her answers or to how she deals with industry is something that is relevant. I mean, underqualified, I called her at the very beginning of this episode, and you can see exactly why. She cannot understand how one overlaps onto the other. There's no connecting of the silos inside of this individual's mind. And that primarily is because she's not worried about solving the problem. She's only worried about how she looks on TV. I think the Canadians really want solutions to the problem, and I believe that no matter which spectrum you sit in, having a balanced budget, having less taxes taken off your check, and having more money in your pocket should be your guiding principle, should be how we govern this country. And then finding the solutions in the middle based from that premise. Not everybody let's starve and stop, growing cows so that we don't have any carbon in the air, or whatever kind of foolishness you hear coming out of Mark Carney and his book Values and the rest of the zealots that are in his government. But that's just my opinion. You can let me know what your opinion is down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.